Are you a business leader or a manager that needs to understand how AI will impact your business? We're going to take a look today at the Microsoft certification AB-731 as a tool to help prepare you to understand the impact of AI and also to demonstrate that you have these capabilities once you've learned them. Welcome to today's podcast. This is the Talk to Me PDD podcast. I'm your host, PDD. Talk about all things knowledge work, technology, impact on society, AI, leadership, all that fun stuff. So if you like the content today, if this has helped you prepare for the exam or helped you in your leadership journey or helped you better understand AI, please like and subscribe, support the channel, check out lots of other content, many topics related to leadership, not just in terms of technology and AI, but all sorts of different things. So let's get into it. Today is episode 49, AB 731, AI Transformation Leader Test Preparation. So I'm going to try and go through in a lot of detail the kind of study preparation for this test. Maybe not everything you'll need, but I think a lot of it and enough that you should be able to pass, and talk about some other resources that you can use. So if you have a lot of experience with AI already, if you've gone and done the AI 900 Microsoft certification, you can probably just go in and pass this test. I mean, it's a good idea to study, but let's say you got over a 900 out of 1,000 on the AI 900. You can probably just go and pass this test. But still, good idea to study and prepare, especially if you're coming in. If you're newer to AI, this is a good test to start with, especially if you have organizational and leadership experience. You'll be able to utilize that knowledge and help to understand some of the concepts and pass the test here. What I did to prepare for this test was I just went through the Learn content. There's three different modules that you can find to prepare for it, or three different sections. The first two have two modules each. If you do those first two, that covers the vast majority of the material that you'll need to know, and that's most of what I'll focus on today. The third section was longer. I think it had 4 modules, but I found a lot of the material redundant, so for today's session, I'll just try and pull out the pieces that I think were unique, that weren't covered in the first two sections of Learn. There weren't any tests or practice tests available when I looked. Practice tests are always really useful to prepare for these certifications, especially if you haven't done them before. You get a sense of how they're going to ask questions. It's a good way to learn and practice the material. This test is pretty straightforward, so I didn't find that a big gap when I took it. If you have access to practice tests, those are certainly good tools. But I think they're more valuable on some tests than others. I think this one, if you learn the material and understand it well, the test itself won't trip you up too much. Now, this is a Microsoft-specific certification, so there are going to be some things that are specific to Microsoft, some licensing things, some specific AI solutions and tools that Microsoft makes and deploys. But there's a lot of general knowledge that you'll get from this material and from this test that apply across AI leadership, regardless of what company or tech stack you're working with. So I think it's worthwhile to demonstrate and learn this knowledge in general, even though there are some aspects of it that are specific to Microsoft. So let's get into it. We'll go through the material. I tried to take judicious notes when I was studying for this one, so I could kind of go through it here. And I'll share the parts that stood out to me. And this is roughly in order. If you were to go through the Learn material, I'll more or less follow that path and the structure of that content. So one of the things that I did think was pretty cool and surprised me a little bit is one of the first sections they actually talk about the transformer model, which I don't always see mentioned in sort of non-technical readiness training. So if you're familiar with the GPT from ChatGPT, that stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and this content will talk a little bit about all of those letters and what they stand for and what they mean. And for the transformer architecture, this comes from a Google white paper and research that they shared. I think it was 2017. Attention is all you need. So if you want to deep dive into that, you can go check it out. But the way that they summarize it, what the transformer means and what it allows you to do with these large language model systems is provides contextual understanding. And a good example I like to think of that is if you have a book, there's a lot of context in how that content relates to each other, or it itself. And if you were to go in and change the first paragraph in a book, that could alter the meaning of the last paragraph in the book. So there's this relationship and context, and the transformer architecture is able to capture that and those relationships. Um, it's able to handle a lot of data and scale. So to be able to maintain all those relationships and then to essentially analyze the entire internet and more to build these large language models, that's something that the transformer architecture enables. And then some versatility across domains. So its transformers have been applied to text, but also to images and to code, another kind of sort of specialized form of text. So that was the piece that they covered on transformers. So pretty cool general knowledge to have, not necessarily specific to the Microsoft stack of AI solutions. They introduced AI agents sort of at a high level, and the way that they described it is that these are task-oriented implementations of AI, which I think is a good high-level description. So, you might have an AI agent that is going to schedule appointments for you, for example. So that's a specific task, and it's focused on that. And then one of the things that they mention is that AI agents can be autonomous, meaning they don't necessarily need a human to go and give it a specific action. But at least, especially in the context of this exam, if you think about autonomous agents, you also often want to think about triggers. They're going to be looking for something specific to happen in the environment, and then they're going to go do whatever action that gets triggered from that event. A common theme in these certifications, and this one as well, is thinking about sort of the easiest solution or the best solution, lots of questions like that. Often there are solutions around whether you can use something that is out of the box and default versus a custom solution. Usually the questions want you to prefer something that is out of the box. So that's just a good tip to be aware of. So again, with agents, understanding, is there an out of the box agent that you can use in the Microsoft 365 environment? That's probably going to be preferable to building a custom agent if it offers the functionality that you're looking for. And then within custom agents, sort of degrees of complexity. So usually it's the simplest version that meets the needs that they're asking in the question. Now, you don't necessarily have to get into the weeds of sort of the capabilities between different AI models, but it's a good idea to know for this test that there are different models and they have different capabilities. Some are more advanced than others, some are larger, some are smaller. And how that relates to you as a business leader is that there are going to be different costs associated with those capabilities. So if you're looking purely from a capability perspective, you might always pick the most powerful, largest model. But in the real world setting, that's going to have higher costs, and you need to pick the right model for the right solution. So that's sort of the level of granularity that you want to understand and know that there are different models that are available to you. And then again, similar to agents, you have this idea of whether you're using a pre-built model out of the box or whether you're using a custom model. And we'll get to some of the details on what that means and sort of the levels that they'll talk about in this exam. But again, if a pre-built model meets your needs, that's usually the solution that you're going to want, especially in the context of this exam. You also have some focus on what are the cost drivers to this decision, the decisions you make in terms of AI adoption and what you select to use. So not just for models, but in a variety of different things. So you'll get some questions that are related to that. Usually you're looking for the lowest cost options. One of the things they'll introduce here is this idea of tokens, which is sort of how much information you're sending back and forth from these AI systems. A very simple way is to think of that as how many words. A more accurate way is to think about how many parts of words are sort of going back and forth. And the more tokens you're sending, the higher cost that you're going to have. Usually, when you get into questions for this exam about tokens, that should be a hint to you that you're probably thinking about an AI solution that's in Azure and Azure AI Foundry, because that's the billing unit that you're going to look at there most commonly. They do introduce some challenges that generative AI and large language model systems have, so being aware of these and also being aware of how to mitigate them so that you can get incorrect responses. It was interesting that I didn't see the language of hallucination used here in this content or in the exam. So that's a common way that incorrect responses are described. Um, it has some meaning behind it that's maybe not the most accurate, so maybe that was why they don't use it. So just an observation here, if you're used to using the term hallucination for an incorrect response, in this exam, think about incorrect response and understanding the reasons that can happen, because these are predictive systems or predicting the text that's going to come next. So you don't always predict the outcome exactly right. Then there's this idea of variability. The way these models are built, it's not going to be the same output for every input every single time. So understanding that there's going to be some variation across the outputs that you get from generative AI and large language models. They also do talk about how there can be bias in these models. So if you have various biases that are in the data that you use to train the system, they can show up there. That's really kind of their focus that I recall on the way that bias is introduced. And then for all of these things, thinking about ways that you'll be able to mitigate these challenges, having other systems that do fact checking or validate if there are bias outputs. So being aware that there are challenges and that they need to be mitigated. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about that as we go through more of the content. So next up, they do talk a bit about prompt engineering, and really that's just how you put in. So the prompt is just the text that you're providing to the large language model, the user input usually, and the prompt engineering is thinking about how you can best put in information to push the probabilistic output in the direction that you want. And the takeaway here is that the quality of your prompt matters for the quality of your output. So you might get a question on that about improving the output, and if one of the options is to do it by doing something to your prompt, that's probably a good option for that question. In terms of how they recommend doing prompt engineering, the guidance is to be clear, to be specific, to have contextual information, and then to have a goal-oriented prompt. So those are some things to remember and to think about in kind of prompt design. They might ask you like different parts of a prompt and be referring to some of those items that I just mentioned. They also talk about this idea of providing templates with your prompt. So if you want your data formatted in a certain way, you could provide a template of that to provide along with your prompt to guide the output of the large language model. They'll also talk about one shot or X being a variable shot or N shot or whatever variable you want. So giving a couple of examples with your prompt to guide it in the output. And then also being able to automate prompt generations. So it's not necessarily just users typing in these prompts. You may have test systems, for example, if you want to have automated testing of a solution with generative AI and a large language model. You may have another system that generates the test prompts that then get fed into that system. So prompts can be either human generated or they can be automated. Another important topic that you'll definitely see on this exam and that comes up a lot is this idea of grounding. And that's taking some information that you're going to provide to the large language model to kind of focus its output in one particular domain or another. This exam is in the context of leadership and business leaders. So usually when you see grounding, it's going to refer to taking information specific to your business, likely internal information, and providing that to make the model's output more specific to your business. So if you see grounding, be thinking about that. Be thinking about, okay, are there like knowledge base articles or other content internally that's going to be relevant to this solution? And that goes in both ways, either seeing the grounding or seeing kind of the internal content and knowledge base solutions. And this is the idea, this knowledge is more authoritative. It could be from subject matter experts, where the content in the actual language model itself is likely not trained on your internal data just across the internet and can answer a variety of things. So it's very broad. This is going to be specific content. And this is going to help the model be more accurate. It may help with compliance. Like if you only want answers specific for certain types of legal compliance that your business has to abide by, you need to provide what those rules are and the information that's going to be within in that compliance domain, and also help to provide more trustworthy answers, especially if these are for people within your business that want the sort of business perspective of the answer and not just the across the world answer. Now, how do you achieve this? It doesn't really get into it in too much detail, so I'll try and stay at a high technical level. But when you see grounding and you see this concept, that's usually going to be implemented in a solution called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. And what that is just combining some sort of search to be able to get this information automatically with your prompt and put it all together with the language model and your prompt, and that results in getting you output that is going to be much more focused towards that internal content or whatever content that is specific for your grounding than the model would by itself. And this is not something that you have to do manually as a user. If you have a solution set up with RAG, you would just do your prompting as normal, and then behind the scenes, the system would go and do some searching, get relevant documents, and put those in with your user supplied prompt, pass that all along to the large language model, and then get the results back for you. So the LLM is still generating the response. You're just automatically providing some more detail to it. So now, in order to implement systems like this, you're going to need access to those internal documents. There's going to be some integration work. And then again, you're going to have some governance around this. So in the compliance example, right, is your solution providing the results is using the appropriate compliance information? Next up, we get a bit into kind of trustworthy AI and responsible AI practices. So understanding that data quality is important. So if you want to ground a system in your internal data, it has to be accurate. It has to be up to date. It has to be well written. Your system will need to have access to it. It'll need to be stored in a secure way. When information is moving around kind of in between these different components, is it being secured? So those are things to think about in the trustworthy AI domain. And with the data quality, a key thing for business leaders to think about when they're looking to implement AI systems is their data ready to launch a system? If your data is not ready and you can't incorporate it in this way, you're not going to be able to benefit from any of this grounding and these approaches. So that's a key business decision around data quality and availability. This exam defines responsible AI as fairness, reliability, safety, accountability, transparency. So understanding that these practices and what they mean. So in fairness, that you're mitigating bias, that you kind of understand the outcomes across different groups or different dimensions, and that those matched outcomes that you're looking for. The reliability, that you're getting consistent responses in the way that you want your system to perform. in terms of safety, that you're not exposing harmful content or other types of sort of not desired uses of your system, to mitigating against that, making sure that that's not happening. Um, Accountability, that if these systems make decisions and cause an outcome, that that rolls back up to a human or somebody who can take accountability for that action and can address it if it's not in as it was desired to be. And the last, transparency, to be clear why certain decisions were made. I can't remember if it's I think it's in the learn material, but like a loan application, right? If somebody's denied a loan application that is using a generative AI system, that it will show them why that decision was made. So that's one example where that would be sort of the transparency aspect of responsible AI in a real system. Um, Security for AI systems, looking at encryption when data is being sent back and forth. And again, these are just high level concepts for this exam. It's not You're not going to get into anything deeper than that, I don't think. That you have authentication, about who can use these systems, who can access different parts, and that there's sort of governance looking over all of this and monitoring how the system is being used. And ideally, you want ways to be able to detect with this governance if there's patterns of bias that are being introduced, if there are somehow breaches that are happening, or people are able to circumvent some of the safeguards in your system, if there's a compliance failure. So any of these things, having ways to detect that this is happening, if the system's going outside of these bounds. All right, so that was the responsible AI piece. Next, we'll get a little bit into sort of some of the business value of these systems. And one of the things that I like is that in this section they introduce sort of the difference between machine learning and generative AI and large language models. So where generative AI is, creating some new text, be it a summary or an image or things like that, or working in natural language, where machine learning is really what you're using for predictions or groupings or things like that. So understanding that both of these systems can be useful and often combined, but they are distinct and different things. So understanding that within sort of the ecosystem, and for this exam, the Microsoft 365 and Azure AI Foundry environments, you have access to both machine learning tools and generative AI tools. So if you see things like predictive models and that sort of thing, or you need an app that does prediction, you usually want to think about, okay, this is probably a machine learning solution that I'm going to look at in this case. So these tools, when you're thinking about building teams and implementing them, I think it'll come back to this, but you want to always have sort of multidisciplinary stakeholders across different environments, not just technical people. But for the technical implementation piece, you're thinking about developers and then data scientists for the machine learning piece, working on the solutions. The types of solutions you might see with machine learning would be predictive analytics, personalization, different types of automation solutions. So now, as a business leader, when you're looking at these types of solutions, whether they're machine learning or automation or generative AI, understanding what are the goals, right, at the high level, the business goals, thinking about how you're going to allocate resources to these projects, whether that be people or computing resources or funding, and then how you're going to evaluate the output. Are there certain metrics or KPIs that you want to record? So that's your role as the business leader to define those aspects of the project. And this will come back sort of a similar question to what we had earlier with pre-built or custom. This is the question of build versus buy and what pieces you want to use. Usually with these exams, if possible, you're going to go with the buy option or kind of the default options. and only when there's no other way to implement the requirements of the question or the solution in the real world is that when you'll go into these more complex options of building your own or doing some customization there. And then understanding that it's often an iterative process with AI solutions and implementing and testing, and then learning and then making improvements and getting better. All right, so this has all been fairly kind of provider agnostic so far. Now we'll get a little bit into some of the Microsoft specific stuff. Um, Understanding M365 kind of environment in general and M365 Copilot, that there's M365 Copilot Chat, there's M365 Copilot embedded in apps like Excel or Word, and then there's M365 Copilot Studio. And understanding that these are different things and may require different licenses in different scenarios. So the chat would be, the M365 version of ChatGPT. It's available to all users in the environment. The app-specific ones are embedded in Word or Excel and may have some app-specific things that they can help you do. And Copilot Studio is really more of a low-code, no-code builder environment. That often requires different licenses than some of the other ones. And that's, a question that you may see and that comes up in the learning material. So there is a standalone Copilot Studio license that can be applied to users, but it's also a part of some of the existing M365 subscriptions. And I think this is a useful clue to look for in some of the questions. So you might get both of those as options, a standalone Copilot license, Copilot Studio license, or a M365 license. And in theory, it could be both if it's the right M365 license. So then you can look for other clues in the question. So if they mention the solution that requires something else in M365, like you're going to have some content in SharePoint, for example, well, you would need a license for that, and the Copilot Studio standalone license is probably not going to be the right answer in that case. So that was a little tip that I found useful. They're also going to talk about some of the out-of-the-box AI agents that are available in M365. So you have Researcher, which is designed to be like a research assistant. It can go out and pull content from a lot of different places, spend a lot of time analyzing that, putting data together, doing some different connections, that sort of thing. So think about it like a research assistant, either in for a scientist in a lab or maybe a PhD researcher. Then the other one that you'll want to know is Analyst, which is used for forecasting. A common example would be if you took a bunch of stock data and put it in there, it could do some things with it. It can generate charts and graphs and that sort of thing. So you could think about it as a financial analyst type agent. So understanding those two are the ones that you're going to cover in the material and likely be asked about on the exam itself. So sometimes you'll have to map out a specific business process to a certain type of solution or to different types of Copilot solutions. So be thinking about how in your business or in a business in the M365 environment, you you would map certain types of solutions or problems you're trying to solve to these various solutions. So I think I mentioned with Copilot Studio, that's designed to be a low-code, no-code environment. You can build workflows using Power Automate, although I don't think they specifically mention Power Automate. An important thing to think about is that Copilot Studio offers data connections, so some of that will be available within your M365 environment. So the advantage is you have this environment, you have a lot of data there, you can already access that kind of out of the box with Copilot Studio. Now you do have the ability to build custom data connectors or bring in third-party data connectors into your Copilot Studio environment. But again, that's going to be the answer only if you can't do it sort of with the out of the box data connectors. They will mention the graph environment in Microsoft 365. So the graph is really just a representation of all of your organization's information in the M365 environment, and that's one of the advantages of Copilot if you're in an M365 environment, being able to look over all of your organizational data and leverage that in a secure and pre-connected way. So if you see a graph, that's just your data in the M365 environment that can be accessed by these tools. If you need to do more advanced data connections or more advanced things with agents or AI solutions, that's going to push you into Azure, into Azure AI Foundry. So there'll be a little bit about that. We'll talk about it, but just understand if you have something that's beyond these sort of capabilities within the low code, no code environment of Copilot Studio or some of the more advanced data connections, that's going to push you into Azure AI, which we'll talk about in a minute. They do talk a little bit about sort of specific responsible AI implementation in Copilot and Copilot Studio. So being able to set up different settings within safety filters within a solution that you build in Copilot Studio. So understanding that there are different levels of strictness that you can set on some of the attributes of responsible AI, ways that you might want to build in human oversight into some of these processes, and also understanding from a security perspective, the Copilot Studio or Copilot in general integrates into everything into M365. So things like Purview and other security and compliance solutions that you already have in M365, that's going to be an advantage of being in this Copilot environment. And then for some of the payment piece with Copilot, some licenses have it or it's already included. Some you may have kind of the separate standalone, and there are also pay-as-you-go options. And then something like pay-as-you-go, that might come up if you're sort of implementing a pilot solution and the goal of the question or the scenario is to find the lowest kind of cost or commitment option. It might be a pay-as-you-go option, which as the project matures, you can then convert to another license or payment model. So now we'll get into Foundry, Azure AI Foundry, having some more advanced capability with both generative AI, but also some other things like computer vision, speech, natural language processing, also known as NLP, information extraction, decision support. If you've taken AI 900, a lot of the knowledge that you got from that is going to apply here. You're not going to need it at that level of depth, but it does help if you already have it. And again, within Azure, thinking about picking the right model relative to cost, that's going to be the type of thing that you're looking for in this exam. There are pre-built models there. There are other models that aren't available within Copilot Studio, so from other providers. Different ways to set up RAG, retrieval augmented generation. So within Azure, you have Azure AI Search. So you can build your own custom search implementation, which can then be used to power a RAG solution on top of a large language model. They talk a little bit about fine-tuning models, and that's a way to kind of put some business-specific additional training and adjustments onto a model that's already been built. That's something that you can do within Azure AI Foundry. If they're asking questions about this, it's often related to grounding and kind of business data and business goals. And a good tip to watch for here is if you have data that's constantly changing and updating, and that's what you're going to use to ground your solution. That's likely going to be a RAG answer instead of fine-tuning, because fine-tuning is you do it on the model and then the model's set, and when it's deployed, you can't update the tuning while it's running live, and it takes some additional work. Whereas RAG is using search, and search indexes can be updated in real time. So if, let's say, you're grounding it in a news source or something like that that's updating frequently, or you want to keep updated, that's likely going to be the answer that they're looking for, as opposed to fine tuning. So you could sort of think about both of them as pushing the model and the output to be specific to what the business wants, but they are slightly different, and especially when it comes to being up to date with changing content. Um, they talk a little bit about agent orchestration, where we talked a little bit about autonomous agents that can trigger off of different events. That can be in Copilot Studio, or it could be more advanced agents in Azure AI Foundry. But it can also be where you have sort of multi-agent systems, or one agent directing other agents on what to do in more advanced scenarios than kind of simple event triggers. That's really the level of detail that you're going to get into it on this exam. There's not going to be more than that, I don't think. And also with Azure, you get into the payment piece. There's this pay-as-you-go model, which is often the answer you're looking for when you're kind of setting up a new or pilot system. And then there's prepaid models, which would be a more cost-effective solution once you sort of know how much you're going to spend and how much a system's going to be used. One specific one that I will mention, because I do think it comes up a lot, is thinking about the document intelligence service. And if you're being asked sort of about specific structured content, like let's say you've got a bunch of invoices that are coming in and you want to implement that into a solution, think about document intelligence. It's going to take that structured input format and be able to pull out the information in a way that you can use. So I think that's one that often comes up with this exam. All right. Rolling on here. It does mention a bit work IQ, which is something that's sitting on top of the M365 graph. So we mentioned the graph is sort of a way to access all your information. Work IQ is a way to do it in a more intelligent way, and to be able to pull in other data sources as well. They just mentioned that. I don't think I got any questions about work IQ when I took the test. And then understanding that Fabric is sort of the underlying data layer for that. So just be aware of those terms if they come up. When you're thinking about implementing these solutions and getting actual value out of them, thinking about the business impact, the feasibility of it, and that goes back to that data readiness, data quality, and some other aspects as well. Time to value, so how long it's going to take build these solutions and put them into production so you can get value out of them. How you're going to measure success and performance and responsible AI, all those things. And then any potential risks that you have in implementing an AI solution in your business. Big on talking about this concept of piloting and experimenting, especially with AI and many of these technologies being relatively new and not necessarily used at scale in businesses. So this concept that you want to have teams that can go out and experiment and practice and pilot things, probably more so than you would with traditional kind of established technology solutions. When you're thinking about building teams, really important to have diverse teams, not just engineers or data scientists, but all of the stakeholders that are going to be involved in the solution being involved from the beginning to influence how these projects and these solutions move forward. And this will go into kind of one of the roles that they talk about and may come up on the exams, this idea of champions, and champions being people who are actually out there, like doing experimentation and doing implementation and evangelizing specifically within your organization how these types of solutions can benefit the organization. So champions are more of a hands-on kind of frontline evangelist than sort of the strategic business leader at the top. There's a bit are on organizational culture and transformation, because this is a potentially a big change with AI and how that some of this will impact organizations. Thinking a little bit about, one, like defining the AI vision for your organization. That's an important first step to have, because there can be various paths that you pick. You could be really pushing towards full automation, or maybe you're not. Maybe you're just pushing towards augmented capabilities to allow your existing staff to do more. There's a variety of different things that you could choose, but being clear on what that is, what the outcomes you're trying to drive, and how that's being communicated out into the organization. And because the changes, sort of the technical changes in AI are so rapid, adopting a organizational culture of continuous learning, if you haven't already, understanding that you're not just going to do one AI certification or one AI class and you're going to be set for 5 years. No, this is probably, every couple months things are going to change, and you want an organization that can keep up with that and continue kind of doing that real-time learning in the flow of work. Then going into governance a bit more, making sure you've defined a policy and standards for your organization specifically, how you're going to handle risk and compliance to, both what you expect and then how to monitor for that, and any deviations and how you'll address those. Different types of controls. If you're doing automation, are there kind of triggers that will bring a human into the loop, or stop flows if certain things happen? How are you having oversight over all of this? Who is accountable for these systems? Even if they're fully autonomous, you need a human or an organization that's accountable for their actions. Having a team that's operationally running this, that's monitoring these systems. These are all new capabilities that many organizations are going to need to build out capabilities for if they're adopting these AI solutions. And then lastly, under kind of this section of governance, defining the organization's specific guardrails that are going to help keep these AI systems within the bounds of what you want them to do. And then understanding that those are going to need to adapt over time as capabilities and data and things change. So it's an evolving environment, both from a learning perspective and an actual run state implementation perspective. All right, getting towards the end here. Lots of material. Hopefully this is helpful so far. Just walking through it. In the broader level of responsible AI, outside of kind of just the organizational piece, understanding that AI has societal implications. So great that this is being covered in this exam for leaders. I think it's really important to consider. Thinking about, what are the benefits? What's the impact onto workers, especially, if you're going into automation scenarios, if you're maybe thinking about de-skilling in a certain scenario with AI and automation, or what are some things that are more empowering? Could be in career development, learning, bringing more advanced capabilities to a certain worker. So all of these are possible. These are decisions to make, and they have profound implications on the people that work in your organization. What's the impact to privacy and various rights that people have? Just the ability to look at massive amounts of data, and some of that personal and private data in a way that you just couldn't before is now a capability, which brings up a lot of new ethical and moral concerns that we have to consider, especially as leaders in the organization. Knowing that how this will impact the people that are working there, or the customers or people that are touched by the business solutions that our organization builds. Again, understanding bias and fairness I mentioned before. This idea of sensitive use cases. So this is something to be aware of as well, and that may be appropriate depending on what domain your organization or different groups work in, but understanding what that is, where there may be some of a gray area, where there might be a use case that one organization considers outside the guardrails of what they're going to allow, where it may make sense for another organization, or there may be some nuance to it if you're trying to, let's say, detect some unsafe content instead of create it. That may run into some of those guardrails, and how do you adjust those? So just being aware that that's something that may come up. Um, let's see. Thinking about responsible AI too in not just the practice itself, but how that comes into how you design your organization, having a part of your organization dedicated to responsible AI, having stakeholders that are champions of responsible AI within those organizations, or a council that brings different, sub organizations together and has that, you know, cross team representation there, because everyone in the organization should be a stakeholder in making sure that responsible AI is implemented well. Um, Last but not least, as we go through all this material, at least in what I've captured here in my notes, is thinking about how you're going to scale up AI solutions and AI within your organization, and thinking about that as kind of a path of development where first you're trying to educate and inspire the people that work in your organization, that they can understand the capabilities and what the vision is for AI within your organization. Um, Understand your AI readiness. Some of that's in people capability, some of it's in data and systems capability, but where is your organization in being ready to implement these solutions? It doesn't necessarily make sense to move forward if you don't have some of the prerequisites in place. Mapping out what your AI journey looks like. So understanding it may take some time for your organization to adopt some of these practices or solutions, and what does that look like? Um, and then last, thinking about building, what they call the agentic future, how more agents can interact in your environment, potentially autonomously, and how that can augment your business. So there you go. It's a lot. Hopefully that was helpful. These were the kind of the key takeaways that I took from the notes. Again, I would recommend going through all three of those learn pillars, all of the modules within each of them. Again, the first two sections I think have the bulk of the material, and then the last one is a little bit of overlap. I've tried to cover everything here. I do think the test is relatively straightforward, but it's good to learn this material to be able to demonstrate it as a leader. So let me know. Good luck in your tests. If I missed anything or anything was helpful, feel free to leave me a comment. Again, please like and subscribe. Lots of great content for leaders or knowledge workers, people interested in AI. And until next time, I'm PDD. Thank you.